out of the timeshare mode into the notion of people actually accessing content and communications in a telematic way, as the French would say. It was in the early 80s, for example, that the French PTT started to roll out the Minitel program, which interestingly had 6 million people using online content and communication services before the end of the 1980s. How far ahead they were of us at that stage. And if you look at those download speeds over that period, you've got this extraordinary acceleration, which you'll recognise as roughly following an exponential path. And if you plot it on a logarithmic scale, you can see that indeed that is true. And this is sometimes referred to as Nielsen's law. Related to Moore's law, Moore's law is usually quoted as being the doubling of computer power every 18 months. It's not actually what Moore's law is at all. What actually Moore said was that the number of transistors that you could fit onto a silicon chip would double every 2 years. He first estimated every year, he later changed that to 2 years. And it has applied pretty much over the last 40 years, almost without exception. And Nielsen's law also works very well. A doubling of download bandwidth every 21 months. And the interesting thing is that if you look at this graph, the red line, what you're getting is transformational shifts. You're getting new generations of technology coming in which provoke a wave of innovation which is very important, and it's precisely one of those waves of innovation which we want to see in the Manchester City region. So the introduction of V32 modems in the early part of the 1990s meant that the World Wide Web, which was already a very useful tool alongside things like Gopher and so on, suddenly became feasible to do everything on the web with graphics. And arguably that easy graphical point-and-click interface is what drove the explosive expansion of the internet since. So, you know, a change in the technology used for delivering bits down the telephone line led to a wave of innovation which we've seen since on the net. And similarly, with the introduction of DSL broadband around about the turn of the century, there was another wave of innovation that was provoked. And suddenly, you might say, it was a bit like Ian was saying about, you know, the 3 weeks during which the 155 megabits was enough. There was a point at which people's internet connections, those who had the broadband, were fast enough. But overall, we've been living in bandwidth scarcity throughout that period. And the wave of innovation that provoked, arguably, is Wikipedia. An extraordinary thing which has completely changed the way in which we treat knowledge and information. Or YouTube, or Facebook. And all of those things were feasible down here. Indeed, we were talking about Facebooky things back in the 80s. With bulletin boards and things, some of that stuff was already going on. But what DSL meant was that suddenly those technologies became, those applications, should I say, became practical and feasible. And arguably not because of that increase in speed, but because suddenly you had a connection that was always on. And it is that always on difference which probably made more, that was more responsible for provoking the wave of innovation than the increase in speed. And the point I'm trying to get to is to say, here it's flat. We got to the point with 56 kilobits per second down a telephone line on a dial-up connection, you couldn't really go any further. And we're kind of reaching that point with the copper wires now. And while the VDSL fibre to the curb, fibre to the cabinet technology gives us some breathing space, as Ian has already told us, it doesn't really get us very far. Indeed, actually, arguably, it gets us about 2 or 3 years on this graph. So we need a transformational change in the technology, and that means fibre. It means fibre all the way to the premises, because only that way do you get the breathing space that we need in order to provoke that wave of innovation. And you know, you've got researchers in Japan now achieving speeds something like 1,000,000 times typical DSL broadband speeds down a single piece of fibre. Okay, so we need that, but as Ian has already told us, we're slipping behind. I mean, this table is actually quite old, and things have moved on quite a lot since then. It's not true to say that nothing's happening in the USA. They're a lot further ahead than we are. And in the context of Manchester's ambitions to be a global digital industry player, what's happening in Amsterdam is really very important. Because Amsterdam's a pretty cool place. And if you want to go and invest, there's an awful lot of people there who speak English. And it's got one of the world, or arguably the world's largest internet exchange. Manchester has got the only significant internet exchange outside of London in the UK. But it's nothing compared with the internet exchange in Amsterdam. So, you know, if you're interested in investing in a city and you are a producer of digital applications or content, then Amsterdam looks a hell of a lot more attractive than Manchester does. So that's the first part of that answer on the technology, the inexorable rise